She's educated, funny, genuinely kind. The kind of woman people describe as a catch. She has good friendships, a career she's built with her own hands, and on most nights, a life she's proud of. But she's single. Has been for a while. And the moment it comes up in conversation, there's this almost invisible shift. A slight tilt of the head from whoever she's talking to. A pause just a beat too long. As if the room quietly asks a question nobody says out loud. What's wrong with her? Nothing. And that's exactly the problem, for the people asking. Because the story most of us have been handed about single women goes something like this. She's either too broken to connect, too picky to be realistic, or just waiting. Waiting for the right person. Waiting for life to begin. Waiting for something to complete her. And that story, as comfortable as it is for people who need a tidy explanation, doesn't come close to what's actually going on beneath the surface. Not even a little. So let's go there. Let's actually look. There's a concept in psychology called the attachment system. The deep, biological wiring that drives us toward closeness with other people. It fires early in life, shaped by the relationships we had with our first caregivers. And the thing about that system is that it doesn't just determine who we're attracted to. It shapes what feels safe, what we expect, what we can tolerate losing. For a significant number of women who find themselves persistently single, there's often one of two things happening at this level. The first is avoidant attachment, a pattern where closeness, though wanted, quietly triggers something that feels like threat. The nervous system reads intimacy as danger, not because the person in front of you is dangerous, but because somewhere in your history, being close to someone meant being hurt, abandoned, or overwhelmed. And so the body does what bodies do. It protects you. It finds reasons to pull back just before things get real. It mistakes independence for safety and calls it preference. The second pattern is anxious attachment, and this one is subtler than people realize. The anxiously attached woman doesn't avoid connection. She craves it intensely. But she can also unconsciously select partners who confirm her deepest fear, that she isn't quite enough to make someone stay. She misreads unavailability as depth. She confuses the emotional roller coaster for chemistry. And so real, stable love, when it shows up, doesn't feel like love. It feels like boredom, like something's missing. Neither of these women is broken. They're both responding to what they learned. But that learning, if it stays unconscious, keeps writing the same story. Here's a question I want you to actually sit with, not just skim past. When you imagine a long-term relationship, what's the first feeling that comes up? Excitement or something quieter, something that lives closer to dread? I ask because the answer tells you more than most people realize. Genuine desire and genuine fear don't always feel that different. They live in the body in surprisingly similar ways. And a lot of women who say they want a relationship genuinely do. And also, somewhere beneath that want, hold a terror of what it would actually mean, what they'd have to give, what they might lose, who they'd have to become. That isn't weakness. That's wisdom the body gathered before the mind was old enough to name it. Now let's add a layer to this, because attachment theory alone doesn't tell the whole story. There is a type of woman, and I want to describe her carefully because she's often the one people misread most, who is single not because of avoidance or anxiety, but because of something far more specific. She has standards that her environment simply hasn't met yet. Not impossible standards, not a laundry list of surface-level requirements. Standards of character, of depth, of alignment in the things that actually matter. She's been called too picky. She's heard the warnings about time running out. She's watched people around her settle, and she's watched those same people grow quietly miserable, and she made a different calculation. Her aloneness isn't a wound, it's a choice that cost her something, and she carries it with more dignity than people give her credit for. But here's where it gets interesting psychologically. Even for her, prolonged singlehood doesn't happen in a vacuum. The environment shapes us. Years of not finding what you're looking for can quietly shift from a choice into a coping style. The emotional self-sufficiency that began as strength can calcify into a wall so smooth even she can't find the door anymore. Identity fuses with independence, and the woman who once chose to be alone starts to wonder if she even knows how to be otherwise. This is one of the most underexplored spaces in relationship psychology. Not the fear of commitment, not the fear of abandonment, but the gradual, almost imperceptible loss of the ability to imagine yourself in a relationship without losing yourself. That's the real question for her. Not why hasn't anyone chosen me, but have I quietly made myself unchewable? And did I even notice? I want to pause here and say something directly. I read your comments on these videos, and I'm genuinely grateful for how honest you are in them. Some of what you share there has quietly shaped the way I think about these topics, and that matters more than you know. There's also a dimension to this conversation that doesn't get enough light: the role of self-concept. Research in social psychology consistently shows that our self-image functions like a thermostat. We unconsciously regulate toward what feels familiar, toward what matches our internal picture of ourselves, which means that a woman who, deep down, believes she is fundamentally hard to love will not simply pursue and receive love when it arrives. She'll find ways, often completely without awareness, to return the temperature to what she knows. She'll leave before she can be left. She'll find the flaw that justifies the exit. She'll interpret care as performance and doubt it. She'll pick the one person in the room who reflects her fear back at her and call it chemistry. This isn't self-destruction. It's the mind being deeply loyal to the story it knows. And the cruelest part is that the very act of doing this confirms the story. The belief creates the evidence. The work then, if there is work to be done, isn't really about finding the right person. It's about becoming someone who can receive one, who doesn't experience love as foreign territory, who can sit inside warmth without waiting for it to burn. And then there are the women who are single because they are, simply, in the middle of something, healing from something that deserved time to heal, growing past a version of themselves that needed outgrowing, redirecting energy that was once spent sustaining someone else's life into finally, quietly, building their own. For these women, aloneness isn't a symptom, it's a season. Not every empty seat at the table is a tragedy. Sometimes it's just an empty seat, and sometimes that's fine, and the pressure to fill it says far more about the people applying the pressure than it does about the woman sitting comfortably alone. The mistake culture makes is collapsing all of these women into a single category, as if single woman is a diagnosis rather than a circumstance, as if the reasons couldn't possibly be as varied and layered as the women themselves, as if she must be saved or fixed or gently warned about clocks and windows and the narrowing of options. She doesn't need the warning. She's thought about it longer than you have. What she might need, what any of us might need, regardless of relationship status, is the honesty to look at why we do what we do. Not with shame, not with the clenched jaw of self-improvement, but with the kind of curious, warm attention you'd bring to someone you actually cared about. Because the psychology here isn't really about singlehood. It's about the relationship each of us has with ourselves, with our own story of what we deserve, what we're capable of, what love is supposed to feel like when it's real. That inner architecture determines almost everything that happens in the outer world. The woman with avoidant wiring can learn to recognize the moment she's pulling back and pause before she exits. The anxiously attached woman can train her nervous system to tolerate stillness and to trust that calm doesn't mean indifferent. The woman whose independence has hardened can find ways to stay open, to let people in past the foyer, past the polished surface she's learned to maintain so well. The woman who is healing can give herself permission to take the time it actually takes without calling it failure. None of this happens because someone finally said the right thing to them at a dinner party. It happens slowly, in private, through choices so small they're almost invisible. And it usually starts with the decision to be honest about which category you're actually in. Here's the thought I'll leave you with. There's a particular kind of loneliness that belongs only to single women. Not the loneliness of having no one around, but the loneliness of being misread, of having your life treated like a problem someone else needs to solve, of being told in 100 subtle ways that you are a story without an ending. But here's what the psychology actually tells us when you sit with it long enough. The most important relationship anyone will ever have isn't the one that fills the seat across the table. It's the one happening inside. The ongoing negotiation between who you are, who you fear you might be, and who you're slowly deciding to become. The woman who does that work, regardless of whether anyone is watching, regardless of whether anyone is there, is not waiting for her life to start. She's already living it.